Good morning, Life Church. Sort of. Woo! Thanks, Zach. Thanks, man. Oh, all right. All right. Pastor Matthew was out last week, and
he's back now.
He's back, and apparently everybody else left with him. So, hey, we're going to get started anyway. Hopefully we got a ton of people online today. All right, hey, we have a couple things I do want to make you aware of that we're getting started back with. First of all, Wednesday night, we start back Wednesday night this week. That's our midweek Bible study. Yes, we have Bible studies for all different age groups, and so I want to encourage you to come out. The way those Bible studies function is we kind of have a large group time, then we split up into discussion groups, and they're a lot of fun if you haven't been a part of it. We have kids programs, we have youth programs, and in 2 weeks, we're going to be launching our new college ministry. That's going to be on Sunday nights. All right, a couple other things to make you aware of. August 14th, that's Saturday, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
This guy's about to get married. He's about to get married, and so is she, and that's going to happen at the same time. So they're going to be getting married. That's right. They're going to be getting married. But August 14th, we have a couple's wedding shower. It's a drop-in shower, so I want to encourage you to come out. That's Saturday. That's going to be right across the street. And if you're like, hey, I'm in the church and I haven't been invited, I've been told permission that like the whole church is invited to the wedding. So don't feel like you missed out on anything. This was just the easier way to do an invitation. Please come. So that's September 4th.
Yes, September 4th.
You got to remember that for the rest of your life, man.
Yeah.
All right, last thing I want to tell you about men. We have a men's fellowship coming up on August 16th. Ladies, don't feel left out. It's just we have a limited room on the bulletin, but next week we'll have it on there. Yours is the following week. So 16th, Monday, men's fellowship. Whatever 7 days after that is will be a ladies' fellowship. It's a way that we get to have a ton of fun together, a great place to invite people to connect in, especially people who haven't connected with the church before. All right, that's it. And I've goofed around way too much with these announcements. So let's take a moment. Let's go to God in prayer. Let's ask his blessing on our time together. God, I just want to thank you. On a morning where, God, there's a bunch of people who are just out today. Maybe they're connecting online, but God, we trust that you have a purpose and a plan right now. So God, I want to thank you for each person who is here this morning. I ask that those things that are burdening our hearts, God, you would make us aware of them so that you can deal with them, so that we can trust in you, so that we can know you more, so that we can grow with you. God, remove distractions that plague our minds right now. Remove our worries, our fears, our frustrations, our anxieties, so that we can hear you. May this be a place of solace. As we sing songs, may these be more than music to us, but allow us to worship you, to commune with you. God, would you allow your spirit to come down in this place? Move in us. Draw us to you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Life Church, let's stand together and worship.
Saw the Lord who answered me and delivered me from every fear. Those who look on him are radiant, will never be ashamed, will never be ashamed. This poor man will deliver them. Magnify, magnify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name together. Glorify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name forever. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, blessed is He who hides in Him. Oh, fear the Lord. Oh, all you saints, He will deliver. He'll give you everything. Magnify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name together. Glorify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name forever. Let us bless the Lord every day and night. Never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Let us bless the Lord every day and night. Never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Let us bless the Lord every day and night. Never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Let us bless the Lord every day and night. Never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Magnify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name. Come exalt His name together. Glorify the Lord with me. Come exalt His name forever. Oh, taste and see. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. He'll give you everything. He'll give you everything. He'll give you everything. Is anyone worthy? Is anyone whole? Is anyone able to break the seal and open the scroll? The Lion of Judah, who conquered the grave. He is David's root and the Lamb who died to ransom the slain. Is He worthy? Is He worthy? Is He worthy of this? feel the world is broken? We do. Do you feel the shadows deepen? We do. Do you know that all the dark won't stop the light from getting through? We do. Do you wish that you could see it all made new? We do. It's all creation groaning. It is. There's a new creation coming. It is. And it's the glory of the Lord to be the light within our midst. It is. Is it good that we remind ourselves of Him? It is. Is anyone worthy? Is anyone whole? Is anyone able to break the seal and open the soul? The Lion of Judah, who conquered the grave. He's David's root and the Lamb who died to ransom the slain. Is He worthy? Is He worthy of all blessing and honor and glory? Is He worthy of this? Does the Father truly love us? He does. Does the Spirit move among us? He does. And does Jesus, our Messiah, hold forever those He loves? He does. Does our God intend to dwell again with us? He does. Is anyone worthy? Is anyone whole? Is anyone able to break the seal and open the scroll? The Lion of Judah conquered the grave. He's David's root and the Lamb who died to ransom the slain. From every people and tribe, from every nation and tongue, He has made us a kingdom and priests to God to reign with the Son. Is He worthy? Is He worthy of all blessing God, we thank you. Thank you for being here this morning. Thank you for being ever present in our lives. As Pastor John comes to preach, I pray that it's his word, your word, not his, that his words come straight from you. God, be with us this morning. Let us learn from you. Grow us to be more like you. We ask for your spirit in this place this morning. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
So good to be gathered with you, good to be able to worship with you, to be able to celebrate God together. When we get to the time in the service, we're going to open up God's word together and dive into it and see how it applies to our lives. And then I'm going to ruin it with a test. All right, everybody like tests? School just started back. Yeah, it's that time of year where school gets going, so I'm feeling in the school spirit. So let's take a test, and it's a very simple test. We're going to try to figure out if we can find water. All right, now don't worry, I'm not doing it the tricky way. Look, I got one of these sticks here. You ever do this as a kid where you try to follow and find the water this way? I found out that doesn't work as a kid, so we're gonna make it a simpler test. Here's the way this test is going to work. I have cup A, cup B, cup C, and one of those cups has water in it. And you are just going to let me know which one you think has the water in the cup. All right? Simple enough test. Everybody understand the rules? You're going to vote by putting your hand up. All right? So how many people think the water is in cup A? Raise your hand. All right. 2 for cup A. How many for cup B? Oh, wow. Vast majority in cup C. All right, we still got a handful. Apparently everybody's choose the middle. I will be the least off if, always choose C. Is that's how you get through college? That's great, No, why did you choose the one you did? And you don't have to answer out loud, unless you're Zach. Why'd you choose the one? It was just a random guess, right? There's no actual information. As far as I can tell, the spotlights aren't doing anything to the cups where you can see through them. There's no actual information, so it's just a random guess. I hope that I picked the right one. Now, I want to just change the style of the test just a little bit. I'm just going to add one thing to the test, and then we're going to retake it. Now, if you can't read that says water here. All right, so we're going to take this test again, and we're going to just try. How many people think it is in cup A? How many cup B? All right, and how many cup C? I see that everybody's very trusting of me. All right. Most of you got it right this time. Other people, we're going to do another sermon on trust in a couple weeks, I guess. Look, here's cup C for you who voted for it. Here's cup B for those who voted for it. And here's cup A for those who voted. I'm just kidding. We're not going to do it. But look, just to prove I was being honest. There you go. Many of you passed the test. Others of you, this is not an accredited university, so I apologize. You're not getting credit for this. It was easier once you had more information, once you had something to look at and be able to say, okay, I know where the water is because there's a marker, there's an identifier. If you trusted me enough, there was an identifier as to where the water was actually at. And that's actually how we find water in the real world. We look for identifiers. Years ago, I spent a summer in northern Iraq, and I remember traveling around in the mountains, and it's a very arid place. It's a very dry place. There's not a lot of vegetation, but going through the mountains, every once in a while, you would see a mountain, and the side of the mountain would just be green. It would have a lush landscape. And what that meant is somewhere on that mountain, somewhere in that greenery, there was a natural spring. And I remember going up into some of these mountains, and we would hike up and we would find wherever the natural spring was coming from. You could just put a cup to the side of a mountain and drink directly from a spring coming out of the side of a mountain. And the way we could find it was by simply looking for the markers, simply looking for the identifiers. Where was the green spot on the mountain? I tell you that today because we're in this series called Make Lemonade. And yes, it's a play on the old saying, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And if you were here last week, we really dove into that idea of sometimes life is just full of difficulty, full of frustration. And I hope if you were here last week, you were able to deal with some of the lemons of life, letting go of some of these things. And if you weren't here, you can check it back online. But today we're going to get to another part of lemonade, and yes, we're going to kind of have fun with the analogy here. Don't get too stuck on the analogy if that part's just not for you. But we're going to look at what's the next thing that we put in lemonade, and it's water, right? To make lemonade, we need water. It's an ingredient, and so while lemons for us represented the frustrations of life, we're going to kind of look at water as those necessities of life, those absolute, we have to have them, we need them to be able to get through life. And the question is, how do we identify where to look for those things we need in life? How do we know where to look? How do we know how to look? And certainly the answer is going to end up being Jesus, right? Like, we're in church. We know that's where we're going to end up at. We look to Jesus, but going beyond that, the reality is every single one of us is searching for something in life. See, last week you might have been here and you're like, John, I'm not going through a difficult time. I'm not going through a frustration. My life is not falling apart. And if that's you, I'm grateful for your story. And there's others who are going through difficult times. But the good thing about what we're getting into today is no matter where you are in life, like, every single one of us searches for something. Every single one of us has need. And some of those needs might be more obvious than others. If you have lemons or not, we have need. If you're a Christian or if you're still figuring out, we have need. If you're young, if you're old, whatever you might be, we're all searching. And so my simple question for you is, what are you searching for today? What are you looking for? What is it that you need this morning? Now, I don't want to confuse this with talking about blessings. We're going to get to that next week. If you haven't kind of caught on to the analogy, next week we're going to be in sugar. That's right, I'm having fun with this all the way through. But beyond the blessings, what are our needs in life? What is it that you're looking for right now? Some of us, it might be healing. Need healing. Like maybe last week we looked at, okay, I get it, I got to let go of some of these lemons, but how do I heal from them? For others, it might be scars from sin. For some people, it's emotional brokenness. Maybe it's doubts. Maybe it's struggles. Maybe it's pain. Maybe it's suffering. Maybe it's a sense of belonging. Maybe it's a sense of identity or meaning or purpose. Whatever it is, beyond just the idea, like, I need to pay my bills, what is it deep down that we are longing for? Because my hope is that for each of us, as we start diving in, we will do more than simply hear a generic message that is for someone else, and we would begin to apply this to the realities of our lives. That each of us would dig into our own hearts, uncover the muck, uncover the things that we don't like to talk about, that we don't like to put out there publicly, and say, okay, God, for the next few minutes as we go through this, I'm gonna deal with this deep-seated need that I have in my life, that I have this longing for. So I hope you take a moment now and see, what are you searching for? And as we figure out what we're searching for, we're going to try to answer the question, where, or more appropriately, how can we look for that water? How do we find it? If you have a Bible, I'm going to invite you to open up with me to Ruth chapter 2. Ruth chapter 2 is we're going to continue the story of this young woman named Ruth, and she just traveled to a place called Bethlehem in Israel with her mother-in-law Naomi. Ruth chapter 2, where we'll get to a place where eventually we will make lemonade, but right now we're just getting some water into the story. If you don't have a Bible, this is going to be for you on the screens. Start in verse 1 with me. Let's read together. It says this: Now Naomi, that's Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi had a close relative on her husband's side. He was a prominent man of noble character from Elimelech's family. That's her deceased husband. His name was Boaz. Ruth, the Moabitess, asked Naomi, "Will you let me go into the fields and gather fallen grain behind someone with whom I find favor?" And Naomi answered her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So Ruth left and entered the field to gather grain behind the harvesters. And she happened to be in the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was from Elimelech's family. Later, when Boaz arrived from Bethlehem, he said to the harvesters, "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they replied. And Boaz asked his servant who was in charge of the harvesters, "Whose young woman is this?" The servant answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the territory of Moab. She asked, 'Will you let me gather fallen grain among the bundles behind the harvesters?' And she came and has been on her feet since early morning, except she rested a little in the shelter." Stop there. How can we find water? How can we find water when we're trying to make lemonade? Or how do we search for the needs of our lives? We pick up, and this story has been much about Naomi. If you were here last week, we focused on the character of Naomi, and a lot of it surrounded her. Here's what happened. I'm going to catch anybody up who's not familiar with the story. Naomi, she had gone through famine. Her family had moved out of Israel to a place called Moab. They were foreigners, a place that they wouldn't be easily accepted. And so they get to this place called Moab, and her husband, Elimelech, dies while in Moab. So she went through famine. She went through the loss of her husband. Her two sons get married, and then her two sons die. And so she has gone through famine. She's gone through the loss of a husband. She has gone through the loss of each of her sons. And now she has traveled back to Israel. One of her daughter-in-laws ended up staying with her encouragement, staying in Moab, but one of them, Ruth, came along with her. And it's easy right now. It actually starts off our story by saying Naomi. Naomi's the main character. And we're so focused on Naomi that the reality is what we can miss out on the fact is Ruth's life has been in utter turmoil. See, it's easy to just view Ruth here as the strong character, the character who has it all together, the character who hasn't actually been through anything. But you know what the reality is? Ruth just lost her husband. Ruth has still gone through this time of mourning. Ruth just uprooted her life, left everybody she knew, everything she knew. She is now living as a foreigner in this place called Israel, which is unfamiliar to her. She's a widow. She has no way to provide for herself. And so she's living with her mother-in-law, and basically at a point that all she can do is beg. And so we look at Ruth, and I want us to see that, yes, she is a strong character. She is a focused person. But the reality is she's broken. She is destitute with no real way to provide for herself, to provide for her mother-in-law, and she's just trying to figure out what to do. And at this point in the story, the most obvious need for her is food. They need food, but much more than that, Ruth is going to need some healing. She gets to Israel. This is her first opportunity to see if God is legit. Think about it. If you were here last week, here's why they went back to Israel. They heard that God was doing incredible things, that God was providing for the people of Israel. That's why they traveled there. Ruth hadn't grown up around this. Ruth wasn't taught this at a young age. Her only experience was the family that she married into, and now she has come into Israel, and she said this to Naomi, your God's going to be my God, and she's heard about what God can do, and so she shows up in Israel, and she's going to examine, okay, is God legitimate? Is God real? Will he actually provide? And so with that mentality in mind, what do we expect Ruth to do? Well, here's what I'm tempted to do if I over-spiritualize it in my mind. I expect her to just sit down and pray and be like, okay, God, let the food come to me. Right? Like, isn't that what we get the idea of what it is to trust God? Just sit down and God will bring it to you, and you don't do anything about it, and that's how you know that you're really trusting God. That's not what we hear in her story. This woman who is a stranger, poor, destitute, and mourning, she's determined to make something of her life. And so she gets to Israel. She gets to this small town called Bethlehem, and she knows right outside the town there's this harvest going on. See, they showed up in kind of late April, early March, or late March, early April. Sorry, I don't know my months. The barley harvest has started. It's the first harvest of the season. So what does she decide to do? She decides to get to work. She gets right to work. She goes and asks Naomi, hey, can I go and gather grain? So it seems that Ruth has actually become familiar with the laws of Israel, and there was this law in Israel. It's actually recorded in Leviticus 19, Leviticus 23, and Deuteronomy 24, where the farmers were actually not supposed to get every little detail out of their field. Whatever fell to the ground, whatever they just kind of missed in first pass, they were supposed to just kind of leave behind them. Little edges of their fields, they were supposed to kind of leave there, and it was for the orphans and the widows and the foreigners among them to be able to come in and help provide for themselves. So there was this law in place in which Ruth actually is two of those categories. She is a foreigner and a widow, and so she knows that she should be able to do this. And so we can read that and think, okay, this is going to be easy for Ruth. There's a law that's going to protect her. There's only one problem with the law that was going to protect her. Not everybody followed the law. Did you know people break the law? You might not have been aware, but there are people in this world who will break the law, especially when it will put money in their pockets. And back in ancient Israel, did you know there were still people back then who would break the law? They would break God's law. So this is in a time period called the period of the judges, and what we find is there were a few times that the people were really like pulling close to God. So often they were wandering from God, they were pulling away from God, they were ignoring his laws. And so when Ruth goes into this field to begin collecting these grains that are left behind, she is putting herself in a dangerous situation. She has nobody to protect her. Nobody to look after her. Maybe the landowner is going to ignore the law and harass her or harm her. So she's out working, and she works from what we see the entire day except for a small break in the shelter. We hear all that. And I'm filled with encouragement about what Ruth is doing. And if we're not careful, here's what we're going to do. We're going to stop and say, okay, then what this means is that we must be self-sufficient and make our own way. Because Ruth made her own way, right? there was this tiny little mention in the passage that we read. It said this. It was verse 2. Sorry, verse 3. It happened to be the portion of field belonging to Boaz. You catch that? It happened to be the portion of field belonging to Boaz. It's this unusual comment where the writer of Ruth is basically saying this, hey, I want to point out something to you. I want you to see God's hand at work. He says it almost like it's just kind of an ironic statement. There's this one person in Israel who could provide for Ruth and who was going to be willing to provide for Ruth and her family and being able to bring about healing in a unique way, and we're going to get into how that happens in the next coming weeks. But there's this one person, and it just so happens that Ruth is in the right place at the right time. The reality is, Ruth wasn't making her own luck. Certainly, Ruth was working. Ruth was applying herself to what she could do, but she just so happened to be exactly where God wanted her to be at the exact right time with the exact right people, with the person who could help. And Ruth doesn't know any of this yet. Ruth doesn't yet know that she's in the exact right place at the right time with the right people. She doesn't know the extent of God's provision. Soon she's going to find out that God's going to truly provide for exactly what she needs, not just these temporary needs. So we started today with trying to ask this question: how do we find the water for lemonade? How do we find those needs? As we look into this story, here's what we see. We must seek provision, but knowing that only God can provide. I love the description of the randomness of her ending up in Boaz's field. This wasn't Ruth's plan. Ruth didn't plan out to be in the right place at the right time. She didn't seek out to be in the right place at the right time. She wasn't trying to dictate the hand of God. Instead, she saw God do something completely unexpected. And so the writer is simply saying, hey, look at God's hand at work. And we certainly don't want to miss it in this story, but beyond this story, we don't want to miss it in our own lives, because there is this balance here in which we are called to pursue after what God is willing to provide for us, yet trust that He is ultimately the one who will provide. Do we trust that God will provide? Because if I'm honest, there are times in my life that I believe I miss out on seeing what God is doing. I'm so caught up in my own work, my own focus, my own desires that I miss what God is doing around me. See, as we look at this idea, we must open our eyes and see that God is at work all around us. He's providing something that we can't provide. And so it's this balance. It's not saying, like, don't work and don't run after and don't go after what God is willing to do. But it's also saying that we must trust that He's actually the one who's going to do it. Ruth didn't have to figure out how to be in the right place at the right time. And we don't have to figure out how to be in the exact right place at the exact right time. And friends, I just got to say, like, that's some comfort to me. Because I'm a planner. Anybody, you don't have to put your hand up. I just want you, like, you're a planner. Like, you want to know what's going to happen next week. You want to know what's going to happen. Like, you have your 5-year plan, your 10-year plan, your 20-year plan, your 80-year plan. If you got an 80-year plan, I need your diet plan, by the way. Impressive. We like to plan, we like to prepare, we like to say, God, here's where I'm going to be, and here's what I'm going to do, and here's how I'm going to do it. And friends, I don't want to take away from our ambition and our desire to run after that which God gives us the ability, but we cannot take God out of the equation. God knows where you are. God knows where you need help. So there's a temptation to just work and leave God out of it. There's a temptation on the other side that we just sit around and we just ask God for things and never do anything about it, right? I'm just going to sit. Jesus, will you save all the lost people? Will you reach them with the gospel? Friends, I want you to understand, first of all, we should absolutely be praying for the lost, for God to soften hearts, for God to make opportunities available. But you know what Jesus actually said when he gave this command to reach lost people? He said, go. Go and make disciples of all nations, teaching them all I've commanded you, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. He called us to action. He called us to do. And so if we over-spiritualize the idea that all we are supposed to do as followers of Jesus is sit and wait for God to supernaturally move, we will miss out on the fact that often God calls us to practical service for Him, with Him, through Him. Friends, I'm not taken away from the moments that God does say, sit, be still. Actually, Scripture is flooded with moments where God just says, stop, be still, trust me, don't move. And if you're in one of those seasons, please don't take this and be like, okay, well, I gotta go work and I gotta go fix everything. Like, if God tells you to be still. Ignore me, listen to God, okay? But most often, God says, be about His business. Be about His business. We understand this in most areas of our life. When we're hungry, we don't sit on a couch and be like, God, I'd really like a sandwich. Please give me a sandwich. Like, you could do that for lunch. We'll leave this building open as long as you want. You can sit here and you can pray earnestly, God, please just put a sandwich here. I'm going to say, likely that's not the way it's going to work. God can tell you to do that. God can produce a sandwich out of nothing. You know what God often tells me when I'm like, I'd like a sandwich? You know what God often tells me to do? Go get a sandwich. It's a very simple command, short prayer. Get up and go get a sandwich. So I go up and I make a sandwich. And the reality is it's this balance of one understanding that God has given me the ability to get up and make the sandwich. And the other side is this beauty of knowing that it's only God who provided the food in the first place. Friends, we would be foolish to ignore the practical realities of this world. We must be people of prayer, but not ignore what God has given us the ability to do in this world. That's why I often tell, when somebody is sick, we are going to pray for those people. The Bible commands us to pray for those people. We also know that God has given us the gift of doctors and treatments for a reason. And it's good to use those things. Some people are going through emotional trauma or just need some advice. And here's the reality. Yes, God has called you to pray. Yes, God has called you to listen to you. But that doesn't take away that God might also call you to use things like counseling or healthy senses of therapy. Some of you might be struggling for encouragement or belonging. And the reality is God gives you things like friendships and a community of believers. It's one of the things I love about the church. It's a community of believers to help us encourage and grow in our relationship with God, that we don't have to do it alone. Some of us need to look and truly examine what are the steps, the daily steps we need to take to get where God is leading us. to write down a plan, to prepare ourselves for those steps. I'm guilty of this too. There's so many times in my life where I'm just like, God, just make me more spiritual. And God's like, John, go read your Bible. Like, you ever have that? Like, God just slaps me in the face with it sometimes. I'd be like, God, if you would just speak. And God's like, I wrote a book. And you have an app on your phone that if you press play, it will speak. Why don't we do it? Sometimes we're lazy. Sometimes we're foolish. Friends, understand that our work is a small part of the equation, and it's not about our work. It's not about what we accomplish. It's about our obedience. We must be people of prayer. We must be on our knees before God. We will not reach this city without being on our knees before God. We will also not reach this city if we don't try to reach this city. Let's keep reading. Pick up with me in verse 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, listen, my daughter, don't go and gather grain in another field, or don't leave this one, but stay here close to my female servants. See which field they are harvesting and follow them. Haven't I ordered the young men not to touch you? Then when you are thirsty, go and drink from the waters the young men have filled. And Ruth fell face down and bowed to the ground and said to him, why have I found favor with you, so that you notice me, although I'm a foreigner? And Boaz answered her, everything you have done for your mother-in-law since your husband's death has been fully reported to me, how you left your father and mother in your native land and how you came to a people you didn't previously know. May the Lord reward you for what you have done, and may you receive a full reward from the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. My Lord, she said, I have found favor with you, for you have comforted and encouraged your servant, although I'm not like one of your female servants. And at mealtime, Boaz told her, come over here and have some bread and dip it in vinegar sauce. And so she sat beside the harvesters, and he offered her roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied and had some left over. When she got up to gather grain, Boaz ordered his young men, let her even gather grain among the bundles, and don't humiliate her. Pull out some of the stalks from the bundles for her and leave them for her to gather. Don't rebuke her. So Ruth gathered grain in the fields until evenings. She beat out what she had gathered, and it was about 26 quarts of barley. Stop there. Ruth meets this guy named Boaz. He's the owner of the field, and I imagine it was pretty intimidating when Boaz said, hey, young lady, come over here. She had no idea what to expect. Was he about to kick her out? Was he about to get rid of her? He was the guy who had all the power. He could embarrass her. And instead, what happens? Boaz says, I'm going to protect you. I've ordered everybody who works for me to look out for you, to make sure that nothing's going to happen to you. And when you're thirsty, you go get something to drink. You just take what you need. And you can go behind the harvesters. You can get exactly what you need. And in fact, he actually instructs the harvesters to make sure that she's going to be able to gather more grain every single day. And so in this, we begin to see the great character of Boaz, who was earlier described as a noble man. We see him as a protector. And Ruth says, why are you doing this for me? And he says, well, I've actually heard about your character. I heard about what you did for your mother-in-law, how you left everything you've ever known, how you're here to help care for Naomi, whom you love, who you care for. Your story has preceded you. And so we see that Ruth is a woman of character, that she was a protector in her own right. There's so much I could say here. We could spend the rest of our time together talking about how your story is going to precede you. What is your story? What do others hear about you? What is said about you? We could say that we should strive to be people like Boaz and Ruth, who were protectors for others. But what stands out to me is not actually about what Ruth or Boaz do, it's about what God does. See, in the middle of describing how Boaz was offering her protection, he said something really interesting. Where did Boaz say Ruth would find refuge? Was it in himself? No. Look at verse 12. For from the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Whose wings? God's. Boaz is the first person in the story, a story that's been full of lemons, a story that's been full of tragedy. Boaz is the first person in this story to say, hey, I want you to see something. God's working, God's moving, God's doing something. Friends, some of us need to hear that. God's working, God's doing something. Because Boaz could have taken credit for it. Boaz could have said, hey, I'm providing you a place of refuge. Under my wings, you will find refuge. Instead, he rightly points to God. How can we find the water for our lemonade? Here's the second thing we see in the story. We must find your refuge in God, not in his blessings. We love the idea of God protecting, right? Who wouldn't want God to protect? God is powerful. God is the God of the universe. Of course we want him to protect. And how do we want him to protect? God, if you would just take care of my bank account, give me some financial protection, that would be lovely. God, if you would give me some physical protection, that would be great. God, if you would emotionally protect me, if you would spiritually protect me, and God begins to put these things around us in our lives, and those are good. But if we're honest, what can often happen, even to believers, even followers of Jesus, is we start to see those items as our protector. And so the moment our bank account doesn't look like we think it should look like, so we're like, I don't feel protected. And here's how you know. All of a sudden, anxiety will just start overwhelming you. The moment we get some medical test that we're just not sure about, anxiety just overwhelms us. And we begin to find, and please, I'm not making light of those lemons that come along. I'm not making light of the difficulties of life. But what we find is we often pour our protection into the things God has given us rather than the God who gave them. I do it too. Where do you put your hope? Where do you put your trust? We started this sermon by saying, what are we looking for and how are we going to find it? And we must find it in a place of refuge. To see how God is willing to protect. See, the things that God gives should point our attention to God, not rather than God pointing our attention to the things he will provide. Anybody ever been whitewater rafting? Three of us. Okay, this is going to be a great illustration. Whitewater rafting, there's the thing where you have a raft and you're in whitewater. you ever go whitewater rafting, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have a boat, and you're going to have an oar, and you're going to have life jackets, and then there's going to be a guy or a lady in the back of the boat who's going to tell you what to do. How does it work? Is your trust in your oar? No. Actually, I would say we're going to go through all those. If you had the boat, if you had the life jacket, if you had the oar, and somebody just sent you off, how many of you are like, yeah, I'm going to be good. I'm going to go through all these rapids. I'll survive this. Okay, our very confident worship pastor. Yeah. What's the most important thing in all of it? The guide. The guide. Like if you drop your oar, that's okay. Just don't drop the guide. Make sure he stays in the boat or she stays in the boat with you. That's the most important thing you have on the journey because they're the one who know how to get through the rapids. Friends, spiritually speaking, what some of us are doing is going through life and we're oaring as hard as we can and we're making sure our boat is okay and we're even making sure the people around us are the people we want them to be, but we're not paying any attention to the one who's calling where to go. Friends, where do you put your trust? The rest of those are great tools. The rest of those are blessings of God. But if we find refuge in God, we will rest in Him. And here's the reality. Most of us don't have a clue what it is to rest anymore. When is the last time you genuinely rested in God? You slowed down. Just stopped. Stopped worrying about what you're going to do tomorrow. Stopped worrying about how everything's going to be fixed. Stopped worrying about your plans. Stopped worrying about your efforts. And you just sat and said, God, I'm going to trust you. And I'm going to have refuge in you. And I'm going to be renewed in you. Make no mistake, Ruth is not living the high life here. She is getting exactly what she needs. She is far from a place of comfort. She is far from a place of it being easy. But God provided the refuge she needed in that moment. He will do it for us as well. Let's read the rest of this chapter. Pick up in verse 18. She picked up the grain and went into the town where her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She brought out what she had left over from her meal and gave it to her, and her mother-in-law said, "Where did you gather barley today? Where did you work? May the Lord bless the man who noticed you." Ruth told her mother-in-law, whom she had been working with, and said, "The name of the man who I worked with today is Boaz." Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May the Lord bless him, because he has not abandoned his kindness to the living or the dead." And Naomi continued, "The man is a close relative. He is one of our family redeemers." Ruth the Moabitess said, "He also said to me, 'Stay with my young men until they have finished all my harvesting.' So Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, 'Ruth, my daughter, it's good for you to work with his female servants, so that nothing will happen to you in another field.' Ruth stayed close to Boaz's female servants and gathered grain among the barley, and the wheat harvests were finished. And she lived with her mother-in-law. Ruth gets back, and what happens? Brings Naomi a meal. It's her mother-in-law. She brings out the grain that she collected. It's roughly between 5 or more likely around 10 gallons of barley. And so Naomi has a few questions. In case you're not clear on this is a massive haul. Like, she's supposed to be getting the scraps of what is left over. She walks in with like 5 to 10 gallons of barley. I imagine that walk back into the city was tiring. Whew. Where did you go? Who has blessed you so much? Who has done this for you? And Naomi, for the first time in our story, this isn't just a good day, something amazing has happened. Naomi, for the first time in this entire story, expresses joy. Don't let that pass by you. It's a woman who's been broken, who's been hurt, who just in the last chapter, she said, my name is Mara, my name is bitter. And now we see her overflowing with joy because she sees what God can do through the testimony of Ruth. She celebrates, starts talking about what God has done because Ruth was a blessing to Naomi. Think about this. Ruth is still trying to figure out life. She's still all kinds of messed up right now. We can't read this and think, oh, Ruth got it together. Ruth is good now. She has 10 gallons of barley. That's nothing. Like, that is overwhelmingly wonderful for a day, but it will not last that long. She is still destitute. She's not stuck on the fact that she is destitute. She chooses to be a blessing to Naomi. How? Well, first, she physically cared for her. But two, much more importantly, she shared her God story. She said, here's what happened. I was in this field, this guy named Boaz, and he helped to protect me. And I imagine like this conversation just kind of expanded, and Naomi's getting excited, and Ruth is getting excited. Because Ruth chose to be a blessing. Friends, if we want to know how to find water for our lemonade, if we want to know how to look for it, here's the last thing I want us to see. Be a blessing to the people around you. Be a blessing. Doesn't seem like much of a search tactic, right? How do you look for what God is willing to do? Bless other people. It seems a strange point when this series is about our own struggles, what we need to receive. How is this last point focused on other people? Because we need other people. Friends, something happens when we are a blessing to other people. It is good for those others, and it is also good for you. You are made to be a blessing to other people. You see what happens with Ruth when she opens up, when she shares her story? All of a sudden, Naomi starts sharing back, and Ruth is going to walk away from this conversation with more information that she needed that was going to provide for her in the long run. She now knew the next step she needed to take because she was willing to share her story. What does that mean for us? Very simply, we got to share our God stories. Do you share your God stories? Are you telling other people? Over the last month and a half, I've been excited. Like, God has been working. God has been moving in this church. God has been doing some powerful actions in people's lives. Every week, I get to have conversations with people about what God has done, how God is moving, how God is directing people's lives. I got to ask, are those conversations only ones that we're having here? Or do our friends and our families get to hear those conversations? Do our coworkers get to hear those conversations? Are we excited about God only when it's in the moment? Are we still excited when we get to work the next day, or we get to the store the next day? Are we going to choose to be a blessing to the people around us? We'll often say, we get so skewed in this idea of what it means to go and be a witness to people. You know what being a witness is? To share your story. People who say, like, John, I don't know how to witness. I'm going to give you a very easy way to witness. Tell people how you're excited about what God has done in your life. Every one of us knows how to tell our story. How to talk about what we see happening in our lives. Share what God's doing. You can experiment with this. If you're like, John, I don't know that people actually want to hear anything from me. Just try it out. Today, give a stranger a compliment. Not a creepy one. Like, don't be weird. Just like go up to a stranger. Like if you go out to lunch after this, just like notice somebody who's doing a great job and just be like, hey, you're doing an awesome job and I just want to encourage you in that. I appreciate you. See what happens to their face. See how it is an encouragement to them. And then I want you to recognize this. See what it does inside of you. See how it encourages you. Married people, be an encouragement to your spouse. Try it with your spouse. Give them a compliment. Say, hey, I just want you to know that I noticed this about you. People who have friends, could you just try this out with a friend? People who have family members, could you try this out with a family member? People who are in the church, can you try this out with another person in the church? See if it doesn't put a smile on your face. Tell somebody they're doing a great job. Tell somebody they have awesome hair. I don't care what it is. Find out what it is to be a blessing in somebody else's life, and then that allows us to be able to share our stories back and forth with one another. Friends, far too often we focus on this idea that we feel alone and we feel distant and we feel disconnected from everybody else in life. And here's the reality, because so often we don't share our lives with people. We must. We're made for it. We're designed for it. By being a blessing, Ruth is going to find out something about what she should do in this next step of her life. It becomes hugely important to the rest of her story. So what does all this mean for us? Today we said we must seek provision knowing that only God provides. We must find our refuge in God, not in his blessings. We said we must be a blessing to other people. Well, we started today by simply saying, okay, let's identify, let's look to see what I'm yearning for, what I'm longing for. My hope is that something we've gone over today has just helped you to know maybe your next step. Maybe it's just okay, this is the next thing I need to do. This is how I need to change my focus. This is how I need to direct my actions. And if you're in this room or you're watching online and you're like, John, I'm not even a Christian. I'm really not sure what a lot of that was about. Lose hope. What I hope you hear in that, if you're not a believer, if you're not a follower of Jesus, is that there is a hope that is unique to what it is to follow after Jesus. There is this beautiful comfort and refuge in God for those who have salvation through Jesus, and it is unlike anything else I've experienced in this world. And so my hope and my encouragement for you is would you begin to start asking those questions. Explore it for yourself. Find out what happens when God begins to move in your life. For many people who say, I'm a Christian, I've been a follower of Jesus, what do you need? I don't know what it is. I know what I need. I can begin to examine my own heart. Okay, God, I see what I need. Usually it's not the obvious answers that other people receive from the outside. We're good at putting on a smile. We're good at putting on a face. We're like, God, I got it all together. comfort, if you need encouragement, run after it. May we not be embarrassed by the fact that we are people full of need. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to sing one last song, and during this time of singing, I want to invite you to do a couple things. One, I want to invite you to worship. Maybe you just need this time of refuge in God. I just need to focus on God. If that's you, like just as we sing, whether you need to sing or you just need to sit or you need to bow down, maybe you want to come up here and pray. Maybe you have something you need to talk through, and y'all know I'm not pushy about this stuff. So like, if you have something you need to talk through, like I'm gonna hang out right here. I'm gonna come to one of these sides right here, and I'll just be sitting here. Like, come talk to me. Like, hey, John, I just need somebody to talk to. Maybe I need to set up some time to like talk in more detail. Maybe you want to pray with other people. I'm going to tell you this. Come up here and pray. Here's what's going to happen. Don't be weirded out by this. People are just going to come pray with you. Because we believe we're better when we do this thing together. So if you want to pray here, if you want to have other people pray with you, if you need somebody to talk to, if you're like, John, I don't even want to talk to you, you're like, come up here and be like, John, I don't want to talk to you. Can you point me to somebody better than you? And I'm like, yeah, there's lots of people in here that are better than me. I'll send you on to someone else. Simply be obedient to whatever God's doing. All right, church, let's be obedient to God. Matthew, would you lead us? Stand together if you like.
Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow.
Whenever we get to kind of the end of our time together, I want to make very clear that just because we transition here doesn't mean we're stopping what God's doing. And so if God's moving, God's encouraging you, maybe there's just something that stood out here. You're like, man, I do need to share my story. I need to open up with some other people. I want to encourage you, don't rush out. Talk to somebody. Learn somebody else's story. Be encouraged through that. When you go out from this place, in just a minute, we're going to say something we say every week. Say, go out to your mission field. All these windows are going to open up. And here's why we do that. We cannot lose sight that this is our mission field. See, we have a time of refuge in here. We have this time of encouragement, this time of challenge. But when we go out of this place, we go out as missionaries, sent into this city to proclaim the gospel with our lives, with our actions, and with our words. Would you pray with me? Father, give us what we need. Even as we are often unaware of what exactly it is that we need. Help us to be aware of our needs, and would you fulfill them, and would you fulfill them in a way that would bring honor and glory to you. That we would see you more clearly, that we would know you more clearly. Father, I lift up each person who is able to be here today, those who are with us online. God, that we would not shut the door on what you're doing, but God, that we would allow you to continue to work in our hearts, continue to work in our lives as we go out of this place. Give us the courage to do life together. Give us the courage to break down barriers. Give us the courage to be missionaries in this city. It's in the holy name of Jesus we ask this. Amen. Life Church, go to your mission field.
Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised his life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised his life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised his life up from the dead. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain.